Hello and welcome. We're here at Holistic Investments, and I'm your host, Konstantin Kogan. I'm really excited to have an amazing guest today, Cristina Dolan, who is an MIT alumni, cybersecurity executive, author, entrepreneur, just an crazy and incredible human being. I don't know how else to put it into words, but really glad to hear you here, Cristina. Hi.
Konstantin, thank you so much. I'm so honored to be here. This is so much fun, and I'm very much looking forward to spending the next hour with you.
Yes, we're going to have a really awesome hour because there's a lot to learn from you. You've been a pioneer in so many spheres and you have incredible career. So we're going to start unwrapping all this, but before, traditionally, I just have to remind people that this content is for informational purposes only. You should not construe any such information or other material as legal, tax, investment, or any financial advice. Now we can talk a lot about ESG, about cybersecurity. But I want to start the conversation about you. Tell us a little bit about how did you start? What inspired you? I know you were in MIT, you were a professor, you were in head of the different boards, you went through multiple IPOs, right? But everyone starts somewhere. So tell us about your story.
Well, so when I was growing up, I actually watched a lot of sci-fi movies. And I always laugh because I watched these shows like Lost in Space and, Star Trek, etc. And all the women were always so beautifully dressed. They had beautiful nails. Their hair was perfect. They had these cute little outfits on. And the women who were knowledgeable about technology and science would always save the day, and they'd have a seat at the table, and they would they looked like they were having the most amount of fun. And so as I looked out to kind of where the world was going and what the opportunities were from a career perspective, I really thought that being an engineer was the answer. That's what I really wanted to do. And I went to an all-girls school, and I remember telling the nuns that I really wanted to be an engineer, and that, I saw this future from Lost in Space and all these great, sci-fi shows. And I think they thought I was nuts. And they called my dad in and they said, your daughter, she wants to be an engineer. She should be like a lawyer or, something that uses her language skills. And anyway, my dad, of course, was an engineer as well. So that was so he kind of understood my dream. But he was like, well, she fails, she can go pick some other major. And I thought to myself, what's wrong with these people? I'm going to do this. And I was just totally fascinated with technology, computers, because, I was growing up in that era where all of a sudden you started to see all these computing devices start to evolve. And I just felt like this was a very interesting era, and I wanted to be a part of it. And so, got my undergrad in electrical engineering, got a master's in computer engineering, and then I got another master's in sort of the media arts and sciences at the Media Lab at MIT. And so I feel like I had a front row seat at one of the most interesting rides in technology, which, sort of allowed me to do some really amazing things, from launching the first consumer websites at Hearst and Disney, to, going to Oracle, where we launched e-commerce because you needed that secure layer. I then co-founded a company because, it's on my bucket list. I wanted to do an IPO. And so, I was part of a founding team that created one of the 10th largest ISPs in the country, which was later acquired by a strategic. And then I was CEO of an AI company back when I remember the investors said, "Oh, AI, it's been around for a long time, hasn't really done anything. And we're not that impressed with it because, Google, you hadn't had that exponential growth of data required for AI to be capable of doing some of the amazing things it could do. And you also didn't have the models. It was just before, this was in the early days of Google. I don't think Facebook was around then. And anyway, so, turned that company around, and then it was acquired by private equity, and then went on into the institutional financial trading space as a product manager responsible for sort of new data and new types of data and communications tools, because obviously in trading there is the use of communication tools that are very critical, and from a compliance perspective as well, there's that piece of it. And so I spend a good amount of time in the institutional financial space, which is how I learned about Bitcoin and blockchain. I was also president of the MIT Club of New York at the time, and doing other volunteer work as, the MIT, I was the chair of the MIT Enterprise Forum. And so I was collaborating a lot with MIT. I was mentoring students at MIT, and I learned about Bitcoin. And I was like, oh my gosh, this blockchain thing. My grandfather was a notary in Barcelona, and I was like, wow, this blockchain is almost like having a notario that, you can basically create an immutable record of a particular document, right? And I was totally fascinated with it. I was obsessed with it. I mentored students. I took a class at Princeton on cryptography. I then became part of the fixed committee that basically standardizes the trading protocols. And then MIT invited me to give a big talk on blockchain as part of the STAR Forum, which is probably one of the most highly watched videos, with Michael Casey, who's obviously now over at CoinDesk. And then I got to the point where I realized, well, it's time to be an entrepreneur. So I jumped from there into the blockchain space, and then co-founded a company that was involved with a cybersecurity risk assessment tool for these new advanced technologies like blockchain. And then from there, I got involved in cyber risk with an Israeli company that was later acquired by MasterCard. And then got involved. I was on the FIDO board for a while, and then ended up working for RSA, which is probably one of the oldest cybersecurity companies, working at RSA NetWitness, and I head up the LATAM business. I head up America's channel, and then some global alliances, including things like AWS. So I feel like I'm at the leading edge of all these interesting technologies.
Well, yeah, that's to say the least. First of all, this is impressive. And this is not even old. This is not even half of what, where you are, what you've achieved. I know that you are also an advisory board member at Wall Street Blockchain Alliance. I know you're the Forbes Technology Council. I know you wrote a book recently, which we're obviously going to talk about it right now. And yes. And I'll be honored to get a signed copy, please.
I'll get you a copy as soon as we get together.
But I think with people who were like potentially like one of the listeners who were like first time they're hearing you, like obviously they're inspired by you, like we were humans, but they're probably asking themselves like, how is that even possible? How is it humanly possible that you cope with so much, it's not even like tasks. It's almost like you need to have an incredible discipline, right? Working not only with yourself and like, getting you out like 100%, like, advising multiple companies and at the same time, but you also have to interact with other people who might be very demanding, right? And we know that CEO executives of big firms, cybersecurity, AI, they're very ambitious people. So maybe you can cover a little bit and talk about like, how did you cope with all this pressure throughout the years and always was on a cutting edge, like between several industries, not one or two, like between three major, I would say?
Well, thank you. But I think to some degree, when you go to a school like MIT, you always think that you're like the stupidest person in the room. So you sort of become obsessed with constantly learning everything you possibly can, because there's so much exciting work being done by all of your colleagues, and you want to have you want to be able to have a seat at the table. So it forces you to constantly be in this sort of learning mode. So it's actually helped me a lot to have so many. I think they say that, you are the average of the people that you're around. So I try to make sure that all my friends, 5 people. Yeah. Well, I make sure that all my friends are a lot smarter than I am. So it sort of forces me to continuously stay on this learning curve. But I also think, kind of looking back, I think that technology is changing faster than it ever has. Technology is not only changing, but the way people use it changes at such an incredible speed that it's almost intimidating to keep up with all of this technological revolution that occurs on a regular basis. So it is quite the challenge keeping up with technology. But I think it's very exciting. And, it's interesting. I mean, when I was writing the book on ESG, one of the things that I thought about was that, there's a big focus on carbon, right? And, carbon was the third industrial revolution challenge, right? Or is still the challenge. The first and second industrial revolutions were, changing the way people worked, and, number of hours, where they lived, this relationship between people and companies was evolving. So the first two industrial revolutions were really about more focused on people, right? The third was on carbon, but the fourth, right? Think about what the fourth is. It's AI, it's data, it's self-driving cars, it's renewable energy, it's cyber. So cybersecurity represents the most immediate financially material risk of this fourth industrial revolution. And so I see this whirlwind of change and evolution of new technologies becoming not just a challenge to keep up with, but it becomes imperative that we keep up with it, because to be able to achieve all of the UN sustainability goals, there's no way you can do all those goals without technology. No way. Absolutely no way.
Well, this brings us obviously to your book, right? So you have excelled in this, and was I would say very skillful in writing this book. So for anyone who's gonna wonder what we're talking about, is transparency in ESG and the circular economy, capturing opportunities through data. We're gonna share the link, obviously. It's an interesting work where I would say holistic view. That's why I love it. Our show is Holistic Investment. So I love the holistic approach in ESG. That's my criticism personal towards ESG, that it's like in my perception before that was okay, it's only touching environmental issues, right? But it's actually much broader than that. And I want to obviously hear it from Cristina to help us to understand that it goes beyond those issues, and it goes to matters of governance. How do you manage organizations? How do you build a strategy? How do you manage individuals, and how they depend on everything that is incorporated in this? So help us to understand, what is the core message you're trying to send in this book?
I like the way you summed that up, because I think that when I was approached by the publisher to actually, author this book, which I wrote with Diana, I actually didn't think it was going to be that hard. And I had worked in institutional financial trading data, and I wanted to write a book. So I was like, this is my opportunity. I'm just going to take it. And I'm going to get this book done in, a month and a half, because it's going to be so straightforward. And I did get, Diana and I did get it done in that period of time. But I think one of the most difficult things was really trying to figure out how to structure the book, because when we were trying to come up with how to sort of organize the frameworks and structures, and the various ways investors define it, and the different types of data, et cetera, we came to the realization that there were so many different lenses at every single one of those levels, that when you start picking these different combinations, you realize there's so many different ways of defining it. So the biggest challenge, I think, for us was really to figure out a way to present all these different options so people understood, that there are many ways to look at it. But in fact, what it really is a risk metric, right? And what's interesting, so the UN sustainability goals, which I think are sort of one of the earlier, because in the beginning of the book, we talked a little bit about about the whole history around sustainability and corporate social responsibility, et cetera. But if you think about the UN sustainability goals, those are really about, the Earth's survival, right? They're goals that are set for the Earth to survive, right? For humans to survive. Then you have GRI, which is a little bit of a different lens. And the GRI is the company's impact on the world, right? So it's for the companies, out to the world, right? Then you have SASB on the other side, which is the world's impact on the company. So it's two opposing, and then the Earth is about the Earth, right? And the other one is kind of pushing, and the other one's pulling, right? And the thing that's interesting about SASB, which during the pandemic we realized, when organizations are not run well, which is the governance piece, or people are not capable of working effectively, that's the social piece of it. When the ESG components don't come together, the companies don't survive, right? And we saw during COVID, what happens when companies we depend on for things like something simple like toilet paper or engine parts for a car, the huge effect when these supply chains are impacted in some way and people can't get the necessities that they need, right? And so understanding a company's survival goes beyond what an investor is thinking, right? It's about whether that particular company, how their governance and management is set to be able to weather whatever storm comes at them, right? And then kind of going back, so now you see these different lenses that you can define the risk as, right? And then, from an investor perspective, investors have a variety of different ways of defining, the way they define ESG. And I think that there was a article that came out earlier this year that talked about how Europe is actually challenging these different lenses. But at the investor level, you have things like a single focus. So it could be carbon or it could be the social aspect. So there's a particular fund that is only focused on women executives. Now, I think you could argue, I think that if there's a woman executive at the C level, that it, of course, makes the company better, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the company is going to implode. So as a true metric of sustainability of the entity, it's difficult to use that one metric to measure the whole company's sustainability, right? But then there's other ways of defining it. So one of the more popular ways that ESG was defined by investors was basically best in class, which meant the G, right? Is the company run better than any other one in its category? And a lot of the companies that fall into that category are ones that are financially doing well. So a lot of the funds that focused on best in class ended up having a huge investment in technology companies that were at the biggest, the best in that category. Maybe didn't have as much of a carbon footprint, right? But by default, they were best in class, right? And then when the tech sectors started to fall, the whole ESG space started to implode. So, that definition wasn't necessarily 100% representative of sort of the sustainability piece of it. And then you have other mechanisms of defining ESG. So things like Shira law might be defined as a form of investing that is considered to be ESG as well, because it follows a certain framework. So you can see those are just a few different categories, but there's a lot of different ways that you can invest an ESG. And most investors will just go down a column on a Bloomberg screen and then pick whatever the score is. And they don't even understand all the data behind that that could influence what that score is. And I would actually even argue, going even further, to say that if you have a bond rating for your company, I would tell you that the CFO could tell you hands down, this is what I need to do to improve my score. But when it comes to ESG ratings, companies don't really, the CFOs sometimes don't even know what the makeup is of those particular scores. And there's, some examples that have come out over the years specifically on that particular metric. And now I think there's a focus in terms of cybersecurity metrics for companies as well, because once again, you've seen that, there's a head of cybersecurity at CISO that went to prison at Uber for some issues with respect to not managing their cybersecurity risks appropriately. So anyway, you can see that there are a variety of ways in which these risks could be defined, and most investors aren't even aware of the data underneath. But just to take this down a couple of layers, you could use different data sets to define these various risks. So, for example, there's an example that have been used in the past. Like there's one big fund that talks a lot about ESG, and they'll source data from like a satellite to understand where the water tables are, to understand about the impact that would occur to a beverage company, for example. But somebody else might use 3-year-old FEMA data instead, and so they're going to have two completely different views, right? then you take this down past the data layer. And also keep in mind, there are companies that will buy data, like, for example, the number of lawsuits that corporations have had, because they look at that as a component of governance. And that's a data point they'll just, opt to get themselves, and they'll buy from a third party, right? And then you have, there's just a variety of these different data sets that people can buy or acquire, and most of the time, the organizations that are doing this analysis won't even share what data they're using or where they've got it from. And that's just the data layer. Then we go down to the frameworks or the standards that they're using. And some organizations will use an existing standard, or they'll take that standard and then change it a little bit. So, like, for example, there's a couple of organizations that say that they use SASB, but they morph it into something else that is, interesting to, whatever, they're interested in, right? So it's always fascinating to me to see, how these definitions sort of evolve. But whether it be at the investor definition of what the thesis is for investing, whether it be the data types, whether it be the standards, the different ways that they gather the information. There's so many different mechanisms by which they do it that you can see that, especially after the, some of these ESG funds have failed to really maintain their value as the whole tech space, and I guess the whole market has had some challenges, that people would sort of have lost their confidence in their ability to bet on ESG as that metric that helps them maintain their value.
And that brings me to this question, right? So you mentioned Bloomberg. When I was preparing for our interview, I actually looked up the numbers, right? And the global AUM right now surpassed probably more than $40 trillion, and it's projected to come to $50 trillion in AUM globally, where 94% of what you were describing actually is happening in the United States and Europe, right? So. And even within this, like, so to speak, like how we call it technically like a Western bloc, right? Countries who care about the environment, who care about the governance, and, like everything related, to the social impact, right? I mean, there's no standards. There's no like one unified framework where, like, okay, well, they go to this website, here's 10 criteria, right? And that we comply with those, right? So maybe you can help us to understand in a very layman like way. For imagine an executive right now is watching you, and they care about this. They care about our planet. They want to be like compliant with all the norms, but they're confused. They don't know where to start. Maybe give us like a little bit like a baby steps, like where to start, where to begin, where would you go, which website to read about it, to learn more about it, besides obviously reading your book.
Yeah. So I guess it all depends on the lens, right? Because there are some organizations that will put out the report at the end of the year, and they're 100% focused on the UN sustainability goals, because they feel that somebody who's going to buy their product wants to make sure that they're adhering to some aspects of those various goals that the UN has put out. And that there's been a lot of CEOs who have signed up to try to do what's best for the planet. And, there are these, pledges that have been done. So some CEOs are 100% focused on that. And I always laugh because you have these firms that, have offices in the middle of these cement blocks in downtown Manhattan. And then you look at their brochure and it has these little green sprigs on the cover. And you're like, but their offices are all cement. I mean, so you kind of wonder, like, why is that sprig there? I mean, but I think that there's this assumption that ESG has to be about carbon and green plants, and so there are very few of these reports that don't have green things on the cover with things sprouting and this happy world there. But I think that if you're going to be a true CEO who's thinking about the potential investor is really going to think about, we talked about the three models, GR as the company's impact on the world. I think a consumer cares about that because they're like thinking to themselves, is this company doing the right thing for the plan? And same with the UN sustainability goals. But if you're going to invest, your question is this company going to survive? And SASB does an incredible job with this SASB materiality map, whereby it's it's like a graph or a chart, and it has it broken up by industry, and each of the industries, it'll show the various risks. So for example, in the clothing industry, you're going to have a lot more risk with respect to, pollution, because obviously clothing is responsible for a lot of the ocean pollution because of the materials that come off of the clothing when you wash them, et cetera. But when you look at cyber risk, for example, you'll notice that, the bottom line has this sort of catastrophic category of risk, of which cybersecurity is part of that. And so organizations that fall into the financial space and, digital technology space actually have higher risk in that category than maybe a company that is not necessarily as data specific, right? Is not as technology specific. So I think that SASB is probably a good metric for an organization that's really trying to understand the risks that the organization has, and then trying to put in place sort of KPIs and projects and efforts, and to try to minimize that risk, right? And I think that if there's a CEO that's more interested in selling products to people who are worried about the environment, then you would probably look at the UN sustainability goals and really focus on a pretty brochure that has, those elements. And I'm not, I think that those are great, goals. And I think from a global perspective, those are really important. I think that if I was investing in a widget company in the middle of some town in the United States, and if they put in their brochure that they are spending a large chunk of their revenue doing something that doesn't necessarily help the mission of the organization because it's not within the ecosystem, I would question why they were doing it. It would be a great thing to help the planet, but I think that as an investor, you want to make sure that the CEO's focus is on, the fiduciary responsibility, of building a stronger business, and that does involve investing in the economy locally and, the people, because if an organization in a small community fails and people lose their jobs, that means you have less of a tax base to pay for hospitals and schools, and people who we saw this during the pandemic, things like, the barber shop and the shops in town will be impacted. So it's really important to support your community, but I think you have to really think about sustainability and ESG in the context of your organization and the lens that you're trying to focus on.
Practical advice, if you may, like, when is the good time to start even caring about this, right? When you because, when you're a young startup, right, you just, let's say, completed your seed or series A, right? And maybe you're just too small to even go out and as you mentioned, right, maybe use it as more like a gimmick instead of actually doing the right thing and preparing for it in later stages. Or you would recommend to still consider it from the beginning, but just slowly build up this strategy.
So that's a good question, but I would say that it all starts with governance, because once you start from the governance side, you're putting together KPIs, your mission statement, and then you're aligning everybody within the organization to follow in that path to reach those goals, right? I think it's wonderful to have a mission statement to, want to give back, to do all these wonderful things. But I think when you're a young company, and especially in an environment like we have today, where it's a little bit more challenging to raise money and customers aren't spending as much as they had been maybe a year or two ago. I think the fiduciary responsibility of executives that are in the process of launching a company is really to focus on who is my customer, who are the people who are going to work for me, because you're not going to attract people if if you don't have an ethical company, right? And the people who work in your organization are the ones that create the intellectual property. They're the ones who engage your customers. So if you're not well governed and doing the right thing, it's almost like nothing else matters, right? I don't care how many green sprigs you put on your brochures, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, that's a very honest question. Sorry, answer, and I appreciate it. Now, if we now shift a little bit to cybersecurity, you mentioned that this is also an essential part of any organization. Obviously, right now we live in right now we're in a cyber war. People don't understand that beyond like the level that we hear, like the war in between Russia and Ukraine, Israel, Hamas, and like on many other conflicts like throughout the war. We hear only about the physical context, right? But like what's actually happened behind the scenes, there's a real cyber war happening, like as we speak.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of businesses are being impacted. Again, it's not too big right now, like, to have all the news kind of like focused on this, right? Because we have other immediate or emergencies. But I wanted to ask you, like, in your perspective, right? You obviously spend a lot of time on this research. What is also the practical tools that we can apply in each organization, and what is the budget you need to allocate? Some people say it should be 5%, others would say 20%, but like maybe give us a little bit of like, practical way how to start as well.
Well, so I guess it all depends on what type of an organization you have. If you have an organization that doesn't really have any data and you're just making muffins or something, I mean, not to say that muffins aren't important, but if you don't have, data to protect, because, the data triad about, confidentiality, integrity, and accessibility is basically what governs the desire to invest in cybersecurity. So it all depends upon how much technology and data your organization has. And then once again, the type of data that you have and how, not having access to it would impact your ability to, drive your business, right? But I think that you're right about the sort of era that we're in. I mean, it's interesting to be a global power. You've always really required having a strong military presence to be able to stand behind your threats, to be able to say, this is the way the world is going to work, according to me or us or whoever that nation is. And if you watch the Ray Dalio video, there's some interesting data points in that one about what it takes to be a global power or reserve currency. But I think that what's interesting now is that cybersecurity is a sort of a new weapon, right? It's a new mechanism, and it has this sort of asymmetric property because you can attack and not necessarily own up to it up front, or you can agree with somebody else's attack and be sort of ambiguous. It's an interesting weapon because it could be so incredibly disruptive. I mean, this past summer there were a couple hospitals in Europe that got attacked, and you had cancer patients that couldn't access their medication, so they didn't really have access to the information with respect to chemotherapy treatments. I mean, the impact on people was massive. And I was asked for some quotes by a magazine. And one thing that's kind of interesting is that I think the statistic is 60% of the devices that are life-sustaining or, that are used in hospitals to sort of measure how, patients are doing are hackable and vulnerable to cybersecurity. And the idea that there are nation states or hacker groups or individuals out there that have this knowledge or rent this knowledge as a service and use these weapons to harm people is just unforgivable, but it's happening anyway. And the organizations that are doing this don't necessarily even have to take credit for it right up front. Like, I mean, when a entity attacks another entity and everybody sees that being done, it's very easy to say, bad, that shouldn't have been done because everybody has watched that unfold, right? But in the cybersecurity space, it's not always that obvious as to who's lobbed over this incredibly destructive, whatever it might be. It just sort of happens. And then people are like, well, I wonder who did that, right? And so it's a terrible weapon, but a very powerful one. And it's pretty clear that it's one that's being used more and more. I don't see especially with the economy in the situation that it is right now, I don't see the level of ransomware decreasing. I mean, there are countries out there that are saying, okay, from now on, nobody's going to pay the ransomware. But I think that's really hard, a hard decision for an organization to make when, there's a hospital that can't access data that, patients rely upon in order to be able to survive. So I think that, we're living in a time where cybersecurity is probably the most lethal weapon that could be used for destruction. I always say cyber is the most immediate financially material risk that organizations face today. I mean, hands down, it's been weaponized by, nation states and bad actors. And it's very effective, much more effective than, a physical attack.
100%. And it's scary how with an advance of AI right now, there's more and more tools to do that professionally, right? Like before it was, okay, well, you have a skills as a coder and you can penetrate any system, whether it's bank or we've heard like famous cases with Equifax and many other because there's also a funny myth, in my opinion, that a majority of the people, they think that crypto is usually use also a part of those like attacks or like the tool, the medium to kind of either loan their money or use it to extort money from someone. But ironically, we don't talk enough that actually traditional industry is much more vulnerable. There's so many banks that were like completely like attacked, and it's just very uncomfortable topic. So that's why I think the mass media is not like interacting with this topic more and more, but it's a reality. Billions of dollars are being stolen every day. And as you mentioned, we don't even know who that is, whether it's someone in North Korea or other places in the world, or maybe it's your neighbor. So if you were to play a little bit like, this, like I would say, analyst that, not on a level of a prophet, but like speculate a little bit about the future. What do you think, not just countries, but like overall organizations will have to do to protect themselves? Because there are a lot of like doom and gloom theories, as I'm sure you know. When the supercomputer will be developed, there will be no way to protect themselves. And people are like, oh my God, so we're 5 years away from this. So just live as if there's no tomorrow, right?
Well, if you think about it, so the biggest threat to an organization are the people, right? I mean, you hear about all of these attacks that have occurred just from social engineering, right? Where people have been really smart to sort of figure out like who to contact, how to send them an email, what kind of link to use. They learn as much as they can about them, then, send them emails that have some personal information that allows them to think that they're talking to the person that they should be talking to. So a lot of that trickery, I would say, isn't even technical. It's more informational, I would say, in terms of finding clever ways to attack. And they've done some studies that they've tried to use these ChatGPT type of large language models as mechanisms to come up with more creative ways to fool people. And it's worked, right? It has worked. So that increases the threat on basically the biggest risk in organizations, which are the people themselves. The second aspect of this is that the landscape is becoming more and more complex, right? You've got more and more dependence on data. You've got more and more dependence on networks. You've got more and more dependence on all kinds of uses of technology across the board in every industry, and especially as the economy forces more cost savings at scale, right? You're just going to start to see more and more threats that get presented as a result of that, right? So I don't think life's going to get any easier for anybody in the cybersecurity space. I think, if anything, it's just going to get more challenging over time. And I think that nation states are realizing that this is a pretty good weapon. You don't need a huge army. I think they said there was a statistic that was shared at the keynote of the RSA conference, not this year, but last year, that there were more cyber soldiers in the Russian-Ukraine war than there were people with feet on the ground actually fighting the war. So I don't see cyber going away anytime soon. I think it's going to get more and more complicated. The technologies are going to become more complex. The surface area of these technologies is going to become even harder to understand. And I think that the hackers are probably investing more today than I would say the organizations that are trying to defend themselves. Now, the thing is kind of interesting too is that the United States, the regulatory bar is going up all the time, and so once again the regulatory bar is going up in December, and so the disclosure rules are getting tighter for publicly held companies. But there are parts of the world in which there are no disclosure rules, right? And so because there's really no need to actually have to tell people that they had a breach or have to report it to the government, they don't have as much protection, data protection for consumers. So the companies in those countries don't really invest as much in their cybersecurity protection because there's no need. There's no need, right? Yeah. So, but now realize that those organizations still have value. They have value in those organizations. And so the hackers are like, interesting. So I can hack them and nobody's going to tell. Their defenses are down. So some of the parts of the world in which, you have this crazy scenario in which they're not obligated to report, their regulations are low, but you have value in data and technology. Those are the organizations and countries that are getting the most attacks, right? And interestingly enough, I read a recent statistic that that governments themselves have seen just over a short period of time a 90% increase in the number of attacks. These are the governments themselves with ransomware, right? So I think that this isn't a problem that's going away anytime soon. It's just that the surface area of cybersecurity is becoming more complex as people become more and more dependent on these technologies.
If you were to really briefly, like in a blitz format, identify top 3 major risks in cybersecurity, what would that be?
I think the first one is people, not having people trained. 2, not understanding what your vulnerabilities are, because when you understand the value you have and the vulnerabilities you have, you can start to make business decisions on what it is that you can invest in to decrease those vulnerabilities, right? And I think the third one is just not having enough people knowledgeable in the space.
Perfect. So that's the thing. You guys, you heard it. You have to invest more in at least education and not wait until you're going to get hacked. Right? So that's that's the first step. How simplistic it might not sound, but that's really the first step. Unfortunately, a lot of people do it only aftermath, in the aftermath. So that's why we hope this will help you, inspire you. And I want to mention another thing, because I don't want us to only focus on problems. There's a lot of problems in the world. I want to talk about some positive stuff. There was a few years ago when Fiverr was booming, and there was I've seen everywhere in New York your picture on it. It was in the subway. It was in different city lights, right? So back in the days, I mean, you were also focusing on your MIT position, post of a president, right? So can you talk a little bit about how did you become almost like a face of Fiverr for a certain period of time?
Well, I'm very thankful to Fiverr because, I did a lot of volunteer work for MIT. I was president of the alumni MIT Club of New York. I was chair of the MIT Enterprise Forum, and some wonderful people on, they call it the MIT Corporation, but as the board of directors came to me and said, we have to do a coding competition in New York to really engage people in the community. And that meant I had to do some fundraising in order to, provide prizes and run the event. And it was a lot of fun. It was probably one of the most interesting opportunities I had during that volunteer period. But Fiverr came in and they were a sponsor for the whole event. They worked very closely with me on sort of the marketing of the event and a lot of the creative that we did for the event. I mean, they were amazing. And part of the reason is because obviously their community has a lot of very talented people that depend on technology in order to be able to provide their services. So they were happy to be a sponsor of the event. So it was a symbiotic relationship. I mean, I had these, there were these big, huge banners that were in sort of on buses and on, subways, and they said, just do it. And I had done a TED talk called Just Solve It. Anyway, so I remember taking the subway with my two boys, and I was like, oh my gosh, look, there's my poster on the top. And my kids were like, oh my gosh, Mom, we're so embarrassed. Like, why do you have to point it out to people? And so, but it was actually a lot of fun. And Fiverr was an amazing partner for that Dream It, Code It, Win It. And I think what was interesting about that partnership was we were trying to do this competition to inspire kids that if you could learn how to solve problems with technology, that my quote there is, if you can solve other people's problems with technology, you have a job. If you can solve your customers' problems with technology, you have a company. And then if you can solve your own problems with technology, you'll just be generally happy. And that was basically the theme of this competition, was learning to solve problems with technology. And so it was great to be able to partner with a company that offers the ability for people to earn a living as freelancers doing something that they're good at using technology. So it was a great partnership, and I loved working with them.
No, it was beautiful. I was happy because I just started to use them. And then when I saw your face, and I'm like, oh my God, I know her. So it was like, it was good. It was like, I was really happy for you, right? So I'm happy that, worked out. I'm sure you're gonna, spearhead more and more companies and help them, which I think, you will tell us at the end also where people can find you and contact you in case they have like those amazing opportunities. But before that, I want to wrap up with something that I never notify my guests but very important, because for me, holistic investments is not just talking about business, about life. It's also talking about the meaning of why you're doing what you're doing. So here's the question, Cristina. So what's the meaning of life to you?
Well, I have this terrible attraction. I feel a level of satisfaction when I solve problems. So I don't know if I just attract a lot of problems and I tend to just want to solve them. But I realize that the people who look like they never had any problems are just really good problem solvers. And so I've learned that trying to be able to make decisions quickly and solve problems quickly just generally makes it possible to have more opportunities and sort of a better life. So that's kind of what my engine runs on. I'm naturally a very curious person, and so I just love to learn. And I feel like all the things that are happening from a technology perspective, in terms of everything from self-driving cars to the technologies that are allowing people who couldn't walk to be able to walk, and there's just so many amazing technologies that are evolving. And I just love learning about them and, having a seat at the table and being able to be part of that. And so that's what keeps me going. I'm completely and totally enamored with technology and what it can do. And, I just hope to keep up as quickly as, the technology evolves, so that I constantly have a seat at the table.
That's perfect. I think it's a good goal, to solve problems, to help others around you, and, start from somewhere, right? So thank you so much for this. And I really want people to find you. Like, where's the best place where they can start like conversation with you? Is this LinkedIn, Twitter?
LinkedIn is my favorite, because it also gives me a sense of who is the person that is reaching out to me and give some context to the conversation. So LinkedIn is probably the best. Yeah.
Perfect. Any other things we have to mention, like, maybe some of the projects you're working right now, some of the announcements?
Well, first, I want to thank you for having me on this program, because it's so much fun. Really enjoyed this format and being a part of your program. I feel like I'm always trying to learn about a million things at the same time, and always, incredibly curious about what's coming next. And obviously, I told you I was CEO of an artificial intelligence company a while back, before Google was Google. And now coming full circle to back to the space, I've been spending a little bit more time in this because I think that there's some interesting things that have evolved as all these tools start to evolve. I mean, we think we have some interesting challenges because obviously it's based on data, and data needs to be protected as part of the cybersecurity triad and the way we've defined breaches and how our regulators define breaches. So there's a little bit of a challenge there, but that's one of the areas that I'm focused in because I feel like AI will be solving a lot of problems for us in the future, and the regulatory bar is going up. We have to protect the data that you want to use for your AI engines to be able to do the machine learning and for them to be able to perform better. And so I think that at those two crossroads, there's some interesting opportunities. So looking forward to continuing to push myself to learn more.
That's perfect. I'm sure you're going to be successful in whatever you're starting to do. So thank you so much again. And again, I hope it's not our last interview, right? And I will follow closely your success and will be really excited to support you in anything you do.
Oh, wonderful. And I'll give you a copy of my autograph book when we get together.
There you are. Thank you so much, Cristina.
Great. Thank you. Bye-bye.